The Wild Boar podcast is sponsored by 2 Pure Pet Fresh for a cleaner and fresher home. Recommended by pet behaviour specialists. You're listening to the Wild Boar Dog podcast with Karen Wild and Jon Bosco. It's episode 15, Dog Aggression. This week we've got some questions and some comments from a few listeners coming through on Twitter. And then we're going to be talking about, as I said, the main topic, dog aggression. Hello, Karen. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Good morning, Jon. How are you?
I'm doing good.
We've had some great feedback this week. I actually asked the question of a few people about, do they like the podcast? Would they rather have an article? Would they rather have both? And really mixed feedback. Some people want one, some people want the other. A lot of people, you guys listening, actually want both. So what I always try and do is back up the podcast with an article. Sometimes time's against me, but I will try and do that from now on in future. So you get a hard copy, if you like, of the podcast. It won't be an exact transcript, but it covers the information. So if you ever need to refer back to it, you're not having to sort of fast forward, rewind through us, babbling on.
I think that's I'm going to say, Karen, I think that's a really good idea because some people do like to read, don't they? But others like to listen. And, if you're out with your iPhone or your iPod, it can be, really, really great listening to a show. But other times, you're sitting on a train and, sitting in front of your computer, you just want to quickly skim through the news.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like podcasts for when I'm doing like jobs like ironing, where I've got to concentrate on something in front of me, but I can listen, and for me, or sometimes walking a dog that's not requiring an awful lot of attention, not necessarily my own, but there are some dogs that just want to potter and they don't really want you to fiddle about with them in terms of training. So, that's when I stick my headphones in. But it was really nice. We got a very nice comment actually this morning from Kelly, who's her Twitter name is Vamp Dog Diaries, and Glenda the Border Collie. So I'm assuming it was Kelly that wrote, but I know Border Collies are very bright, so could have been both. Saying thank you for putting the podcast on iTunes and saying they're so easy to play back in the car. And she never has enough time to read all she wants to. So there was another podcast she mentions as well. It wasn't just our one, but I think, that kind of is the fundamental thing for me is just, listen to your own radio show when you want to and hopefully enjoy it. And we do really love you coming back and asking us questions. So please carry on.
Oh, that's a fantastic comment there from Kelly and Glenda. When I saw the show notes, I read it as Vampire Dog Diaries, not Vamp Dog Diaries. Sorry,
well,
Kelly.
I guess it's just, I don't know if it's, I don't know if it's a Twilight thing. Lots of people like vampires, don't they? But I don't know if it's anything to do with that. Maybe Kelly's probably sitting there going, no.
And I see,
carry on.
I'm going to say, I see we also have a question from Nats.
Yes, Nats, Twitter name is Bubbly Nats, and she sent me a couple of questions, and they're both really good. The general question that she's asked, and I think it's a key question, is about dog leads. Which is the best dog lead? A short lead, a training lead, a long line or an extender, what they call a flexi, but for everyday use. And I mean, if you ask someone like me, obviously I like all different sorts for different purposes. But for my own dogs, I have an everyday lead. My everyday choice of lead is a 4-foot bridle leather dog lead.
I don't understand feet. Leather. What about feet?
4 feet. Oh gosh, what's that? About 1 meter and a bit. And hang on, 3 feet is roughly 1 meter.
Yeah.
So and a foot is 30 centimeters. So yeah, so 1 meter 30 centimeters. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah, something about that.
Anyone out there who knows more than that? Sorry about that. So normally round about that length is plenty, and I use bridle leather. And the reason I ask for bridle leather is because a leather lead that you get that is cheap and nasty will not survive in the wet. A bridle leather lead is made with, according to my saddler friend, made with the right sort of leather. It's not split, so it is waterproof. And actually the way to soften a bridle leather lead, so I'm actually told by my saddler friend who knows about leather, is to dunk it in a bucket of water and twist it a lot. So actually the more they're worn and the more they use, the softer they get.
What about,
and I have to have a lead that's soft on my hands. I cannot have a nasty sort of scratchy, what I call a hurty lead. I hate those.
Hurty lead. I was going to say, what about material leads? I mean, I like you, Karen, but I walk 3, 4, 5, 6 dogs at a time, and it really cuts up my hands sometimes. But I find because the weather is, it can be so bad here. even if I'm decked out properly, the leads sometimes get wet. You know, Bassets are so low to the ground, and you know, I do put them in the washing machine. How do you know?
The leads, not the dogs.
Spot
In
on.
you go.
In you go.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I don't like webbing leads at all. I haven't found a soft webbing lead that doesn't burn your hands. You know, sometimes you don't need much of a lead on a dog, you know, but certainly if you're training, you need to pass the lead through your hands a lot. And if you've got more than one dog, you end up sort of reorganizing your leads quite a bit as well. There's all sorts of contraptions you can get to link dogs together. And, you know, that's for another podcast, really. But I still find, for me, that a bridle leather lead works, because it doesn't really, if you think about horses' reins, you know, and these are leads that have been used for, well, not just leads, but and reins and things like that have been used for many, many years. They're extremely weatherproof. They're not especially, you know, there's no magical property. It's just a very soft, very, very soft thing. And you can always get a saddler to soften it up if you didn't want to do it yourself. They're not that bad initially, but it just, you know, speeds up the process, and they take minimal care. The lead that I use, or the leads that I use, are 14 years old, and they are still going strong.
Oh, that's
and
brilliant.
they're really, really good. And you can get them made any shape, size, whatever. So if you've got a saddler local to you, then I would have a look. You know, don't waste your money on a cheap lead. Yeah, like you say, the flexi leads, they have their place. Some trainer friends of mine absolutely hate them. I do think you have to be very careful with a long lead, because the dog can quite easily sort of spin around and scythe you or anybody you're walking with, you know, and they can snap and they can do all sorts of things. But I think they have their place. If you get an appropriate one for the speed and the weight of your dog, then they can be really useful. If you just want to have a bit of a switch off walk, you know, you can't really let your dog off for whatever reason, but you're not near a road, I would never use one of those near a road. I would shorten it up and use it. But I think that they're quite handy for that sort of thing. And if it's wet, they don't drag on the ground. For training and for recall purposes, I use a long line. So I do use a various range of things. But yeah, for every day, my bridle leather lead couldn't be without it.
Every day I use a combination of saddle leather. I've got a couple of sort of material leads. I use a long flexi lead with Aggie very often, because she tends to like to walk about 4 meters behind everyone else because she's so slow. I mean, where I am, it's just forests and there's very little traffic. I do make sure when I go out in the dark that she's got lots of glow in the dark things, just in case something comes along. But I mean, I think the other thing you have to be careful with these long flexi leads is the weight of the lead. You know, if something does quickly happen and you pull on one of those flexi leads that's really, really long, you can do a lot of damage to the dog. I think you have to be really careful of that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of handling technique that can be taught, and we'll talk about that later on in this podcast, because I think handling is fundamental to what I teach. And I think that if you're teaching a dog, or you're doing anything with the dog where you're going to have to maneuver the dog around, that thing that's in your hand has to be as simple and easy to use as possible. And that's why my one thing about a flexi lead or an extending lead is that you've got a big chunk of plastic that can be quite slippery. I mean, the grippy ones are a bit better, but it's not very easy to maneuver. And so I do think dog training types like me, you know, we can get quite geeky and quite technical over equipment. But even so, what I think back to is, what do I like to use with my dog? One that doesn't hurt, one that's long lasting. I don't mind spending 30 quid on a bridle leather lead, however many years. Well, it wasn't 30 quid a few years ago, like whatever, 15 years ago, it was about 13. But now they're around about that if you're getting a decent one. But I've never, ever, ever needed to use a different one, and I've never had to replace it. Whereas my vinyl, the webbing leads go fluffy, or they just hurt. So yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to sell anyone a lead.
But just before we move on, Karen,
I think it's really worth it.
But just before we move on, a related point: do you think that collars should be leather or not? Is it nylon material?
It depends on your dog, I would say, for that, because I do, for my own dogs now, they're not working dogs. I've always had bridle leather collars for my dogs as well, but for my 2 dogs at the moment, particularly one of them, if you put anything that's not the softest ever, it actually rubs his fur away. He's got no illness. He's perfectly okay. He's just got very, very soft fur. And if you put something around his neck, it would rub it away. So he's actually got a fleece lined collar that I had made for him. Again, it was somebody on eBay that makes them. They charged me about £3, next to nothing, but it's a lovely fleece lined collar, so it's very soft. And I think, if you've got a dog with very short hair, you do need to be careful what you put around their neck. If you've got a sight hound, you probably want a different width on your dog. So I just think something that, again, you don't want anything that's going to scratch or irritate the dog. So, judge what you've got. There are brilliant people out there that will tailor make something for your dog without, they don't charge a lot. I love shopping around for those sorts of things.
Absolutely. All right, Karen, just let me do this. And now it's time to move on. I see there is an email from Kathy Flake here, and she writes, do you have any info on dog reactive dogs on your 11th of October podcast?
That shows you when the email came in. As I said the other week, there's been questions that I've been dying to answer on the podcast for ages. And we've had so much stuff that we wanted to talk about. Now is the time. So, Kathy, I'm really sorry it's taken us all this time to get onto it, but I will let you know I'll let you know before this comes out so that you know to listen. She's talking about her own, a dog that is a foster that's very dog reactive. And this is very typical behaviour of a dog reactive dog. He lunges and barks when we see dogs while walking on lead. Haven't tried him off lead yet. Trying to head it off with treats, but the dog's going berserk when he sees a dog behind a fence who barks back at him, for example. And she, quite rightly says, it would make it difficult for the dog to be adopted, as it would any dog that behaves like that. What do you do to help with the problem? Is there anything you can do? So really what we're looking at is what I've kind of umbrella called dog aggression. But aggression, like we talked about last week, it doesn't necessarily mean a bite. It could just mean barking and lunging and snapping and doing all these other things. And we've got to work out, is it, what is that behaviour designed for? Is it aggressive behaviour? Is it trying to say something else? So there's some key points here that I think we need to address before we start even looking at how are you going to deal with it. The first point I would really think is, in your mind, should all dogs get along with each other? Should they? What do you think about that, John? Should dogs all get along with each other?
Oh, that's a really tricky. No, I don't think they should all. I mean, not all people get along. I think it's okay for dogs to set limits. For example, older dogs can often get very stressed by small, smaller, younger puppies who tend to be a bit more, full on. I think that was the phrase used the other week.
Full on, yeah.
I think, one of the things I noticed, because I'm now lead training, the 3 pups that I've got here who are 5 months. And I've noticed that, when we sometimes meet some of the older dogs, because the pups are very, very full on, the older dogs tend to, they don't want to meet these younger dogs. And, they clearly don't get on, and they would be more comfortable if they were off the lead so they could, avoid these pups. They don't bark.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. No, absolutely. They don't bark. I know you're more experienced at looking at the dogs and things like that. Don't wait for the bark. You can see avoidance. So avoidance signals can be, we've talked about this several times, yawning, licking is not necessarily avoidance, but it's a sign of, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. But actual avoidance, turning the head away, moving the body away, sitting down. Some people refer to these as appeasement signals. Some people refer to them as calming signals. I'm not sure about that the dog is deliberately trying to calm the other dog down, but what I think is the dog is showing a signal that they are not especially okay with this. And a well socialized dog would pick up on those signals, but young puppies don't necessarily pick up on those signals, and under socialized dogs don't necessarily pick up on those signals either. So, there is no definite answer, is there? Should all dogs get along? Well, I would expect probably not. It would be nice, and certainly in your household, if they get along, but there's likely to be competition for various things. Certainly if you're out on a walk, don't automatically assume that your dog should get along with every dog they meet, because that's not necessarily going to happen. And throughout their lives, you might have the most bomb-proof, reliable dog that one day just says, I don't like that, to a particular dog on a particular day. So that's the first thing. Don't feel bad if you're walking along with your dog and they suddenly go off like a rocket. That you need to react to it in an appropriate way. But it's not like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, my dog's really antisocial, they don't like it. It might be just something that the other dog has done, or it might be a hot spot for your dog that your dog is actually a bit sensitized to. So, just kind of get that into perspective a little bit, I think, first of all.
So here's the scenario, Karen. You're out walking, you've got your, well-trained, very, very happy, easygoing dog beside you. You're walking along and you meet, I don't know, let's say a Wheaten Terrier. The Wheaten Terrier,
okay.
You see the Wheaten Terrier in the distance, and you start to pick up that the owner of the Wheaten Terrier is slightly nervous, slightly unsure. Because you can see that they start to look for ways that they can get away from you. They move the dog to the other side. They start projecting a certain insecurity. And you start to build up thinking this is a dog that's going to bark at my dog, that may lunge forward.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can do as you are approaching another dog to keep your dog calm and with you?
Yes. Well, hopefully you've got some basic toolkit commands. I'm always banging on about toolkit commands. With its basic things like just saying heel to your dog, so that the dog thinks, oh yeah, okay, you're talking to me and I need to keep moving, but it's a stay position on the move. So in other words, you see your dog sort of scuttle into the place where you've taught them that heel means, and they'll just walk next to you thinking about potentially what you're about to give them or what you're about to say that's a nice thing. So the first thing I would do is just put my dog under control. And certainly if they're off lead, I would quickly just call them over, pop them on lead. When I say quickly, I don't mean in a panic. I just mean, oh, look what I've got, that kind of attitude. I'd also then chat. I'd either chat to the dog or I'd say hello to the other owner in a really nice voice so that the dogs aren't feeling like there is a potential problem here. So it's important that you don't sort of show any signs of tension. That's so easy to say. I know it is. But what I'm trying to get across to my dog is I am predictably rewarding. I am predictably controlling the situation. There isn't anything you really need to do. So I'm just going to tell you heel, and you're now thinking about me and not thinking about the other dog. And that then in its turn helps the other person, because if their dog is showing signs of confrontational behavior, staring and looking a bit kind of uncertain, it's not going to be a problem on the basis of what my dog's body language is showing.
Fair enough. What about if we reverse the scenario? If you know that your dog is the one that lunges and barks.
And unfortunately, you know it from day one, don't you? And then you're kind of sensitized to it, and there's certain types of dog that your dog barks at, and sometimes they do and maybe sometimes they don't. I would say that, again, ask yourself the right questions. What is your dog saying? Dogs don't bark for one reason. They bark for all sorts of reasons. So is the dog saying go away? Is it saying what's that? Especially if it's a type of dog that it hasn't come across before. Some dogs really go mad at black dogs. Now, I don't know why that is, but I would surmise that maybe a black dog, you can't see all of the features on its face. I don't know. I don't know. But some dogs seem to really be like, what on earth is that? Or your dog might be saying, I want to get closer to smell what it is and to investigate. And then, they might also be saying, it's a moving thing. I've got to chase it. So you have to understand what sort of dog you've got in the first place to know, is it that kind of frustration? Is it that it really doesn't want to get any closer and it's being prevented because you're still walking towards this other dog? What? So that would be my first port of call. What kind of dog have I got here? What does he like? Does he like chasing? Is it that he wants to chase the other dog? And so on. So you ask yourself all those questions. Then you've got to remember that if you've had a regular experience of this kind of thing happening, then there is a pattern set up. So if you basically what you can end up doing is practicing the very behavior you don't want. For example, dog barks, you take the dog away. Your dog barks, you take it away. Your dog barks, you take it away. So it either becomes self-rewarding for a dog that thinks, I don't want to be here, bark, bark, bark. Oh, I get taken away. So therefore the dog learns that. Or I must get closer, lunge, 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 and you take it away. The next time it's going to be lunging and barking even harder to get towards the other dog. Again, we don't necessarily know that it's, going to rip the other dog's head off. We don't know that. Well, you might know that, but if you do, then there's other things you can do about that. But what you've got to try and suss out is, you know what, my dog really hasn't met many of this kind of dog. Or, you know what, I do that every time I tighten the lead, or every time I go, don't, which is basically teaching my dog that I'm going to sound anxious, and therefore they're going to be more anxious. So you've got to make yourself predictably rewarding instead. Sure. Easy to say, but it takes a lot of practice. If you've built up a habit, like we've said so many times on these podcasts, you have to, think, what's the habit I've built up? What is it? Okay, right, I'm going to break it down and I'm going to put together a new habit that is actually rewarding for both of us.
What I do, I've had this myself because I have, I often walk 3-4 big bassets, and as a pack, because they're a pack, they, particularly with retrievers, they go through a stage, or they've been through a stage where they see a retriever and they just woof really loudly. And of course, there are quite a lot of older seniors around here who walk their dogs, and they can be quite intimidated by 3 big basset hounds going woof. And
yes.
The way that I deal with this, if they go through this stage, and they do occasionally, is to go back to the training. And of course, I like clicker training. That's what I've worked with. And as soon as I see the dog from a distance, click treat as long as they're calm. A click and treat when they're calm. And then I up they have to, it has to go further before they get the click and the treat, up until the stage where you're, okay, now you've passed the dog calmly, then you get the click and the treat. And, I make sure that it's high octane treats, actually pig's heart, they which for a vegetarian isn't particularly great, but I do. Because they need something that's sort of high octane that they really, really want to work for. And that, that's what do you think about that as a strategy, Karen?
I think the key point in what you've said is that you act early. The people will say that they don't predict, the dog does it without warning. But I actually think if you learn to read the dog, it's not. There is quite a lot of warning. Some dogs don't show warning, and some breeds don't give a lot away. And I would accept that. If you've got certain bull breeds that, and some dogs don't give much body signals before they go. But if they've done it before, predictably, you can expect that's going to happen again. So while you are at a good distance, that is when, if you're going to use something like food, you have to be able to keep them positive and calm at that point. Kathy makes a good point in her initial letter. She's trying to head it off with treats, but he still goes berserk. If you wait until the dog is up in the air, it is a little bit too late. I think it's even if you have a high octane treat, most people will try, at that point to distract the dog, unless they're a particularly foodie dog, which is, not necessarily the case. It's really difficult to do it at that point. So what you have to do is rewind, and the minute even a single snifter of a dog appears on the horizon, that is at the point where you distract your dog, train them to do something, click, treat. But the idea is you give them something before they get to the threshold that causes, all the anxiety. If you leave it, what you're then trying to do is settle a dog down that's already decided, maybe, oh my goodness, or I must chase, or whatever it is that we've talked about, and you're waving a bit of food about. It's not going to work like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone who criticizes, I've heard some big criticisms of, this is an aggressive dog, giving it a cookie is not going to help. Well, absolutely not. It's not going to help, because it's in the zone. I hate that word, but it's kind of already, it's so uptight. So what you do is you rewind it, you start to deal with the dog before it gets to that point, and the dog never gets to that point because you haven't let it get out of control. You've kept control with the potential reward in hand. And if they don't want the reward, there are other rewards in life. Don't forget, it's not just food. Freedom is a reward. Attention is a reward. Greeting the other dog, if it's actually frustration, that's a huge reward. So let's not underestimate the power of these things as well.
What do you think about here Cesar Millan has been incredibly popular, and he has this classic the correction.
Oh, the noise thing.
Yeah.
That's like any sound. He could say banana and then do what he does, and then the dog would stop at banana. But the point is about that noise, it's high pitched. It's probably a noise that, there's lots of theories about this, but it's a noise that they may not have heard before. It's the kind of noise that would make most of us go, what was that? So, but what it's doing, it's a predictor of something else. It doesn't mean anything on its own necessarily, but it's predicting that in a minute this is going to happen. So you have to do it a few times to get the dog to understand what's about to happen. And the problem with the technique, I believe, that is going on there is it's waiting till the dog's doing a behavior and then punishing the behavior, which doesn't teach the dog to do anything else but get to that point, get punished for it, and hopefully the dog will backtrack and think, well, I won't do that again. But I wouldn't want to do that through punishment myself.
No.
And, I would rather intervene early, just as I don't let my kids go wrong and then ground them for a month. What I'd say is, okay, don't, make sure you come back on time. Here is a watch. Come back at this time. The watch will beep. Come back. And then if they fail to do it then that's a direct consequence of them having a decision to make. Whereas if you just let the dog get on with it and then splat it, that's not my way of doing things. I don't think that's a particularly nice way of doing things. And in the long term, I think what it ends up doing is teaching a whole lot of side effect behaviours, such as, as you reach for the dog doesn't actually trust you either. So I would never teach that. I'm not saying it doesn't work, because I think on one level, I've seen it work, but it works short term and it brings along so many problems along with it that I would not do it. If you've got a dog that's barking at another dog and you start getting anxious and going at it, it just sounds like you're joining in. Yeah. It really does.
So, Cesar, if you're listening and you want to come on the show and talk about this, why don't you get in touch on Twitter? And that's at twitter.com/wildpaw, or you can send me a message on twitter.com/Jon Bosco. Karen, one of the things that I do as a breeder is to teach a unique sound, which means basically, this is really good and put your attention on me. And that sound is one of the things with the dogs that I breed that I use in this kind of situation. Full attention on me. You'll get something really good, because it can be a hassle carrying a clicker. I know one of the things when I recommend clickers to people is that they say, it's so jobbigt. It's really difficult to have a clicker in your hand and the leads, whereas I think a vocal sound is always really good.
Yeah, you've always got your voice with you. And I think I've said before, I've got one trainer that I'm in touch with through Twitter who does amazing training videos, and she just says, yes, when the dog does it right. You've got to have something that predictably means that something good is coming. And it doesn't really matter what it is. When you start to get into training, I think what you end up with is you end up with a realization that words don't actually have any meaning until you give them the meaning, and sounds don't have any meaning to the dog until you give them the meaning. But the dogs learn through all sorts of other ways, not just vocalizations from you, about what's about to happen. And that is something that I wanted to say about this whole thing, is that your body language is so important to your dog. If you react in a way that means you stiffen up, you stare, you do all these things that your dog sees you do every single day, it doesn't matter really what you say to some degree. It matters what you do as well. And handling, like I said at the very start, be aware of your handling skill, build your handling skill. What are you doing? How are you holding the lead? What is it that you're doing when you see the other dog? What do you do when you don't see another dog? And try and work on that, because it makes a huge difference to how your dog perceives the situation.
One of my dogs is on heat at the moment, or in heat, whatever you say in English, in season. Do you have any thoughts about that in terms of, this kind of aggression?
Yeah. I mean, dogs interact with other dogs, and scent is a big part of it. And male dogs can detect a female in season from a very long way away. So that may well have a bearing on how they behave. We are pathetic primates with no sense of smell that's really significant. So we're not going to be able to see that. Also, male dogs that aren't castrated, they scent mark. They do smell apparently different. They give off different kinds of pheromones. So don't rely too heavily on the neutering argument in terms of, correcting a behavior. There's a lot more to it than that. However, it does have an impact. So, be aware of that. If you've got a bitch in season, you can't see it, you may not know, but it might cause the other bitches that are around to act a bit differently. And certainly the male dogs, castrated or not, can also make a difference. Even if they've had their bits taken away, the brain still does stuff about these things. So, don't overblow it, because it can become an all-encompassing, well, I'll just have him castrated and it will make it fine. Probably it might improve some things, but not everything. And sometimes it doesn't make any difference at all. but it could have a bearing. So just be aware of that as you go along and ask yourself these other questions. Also, the age of the dog. Sorry, John. I was just going to say the age of the dog, thinking about testosterone. When you've got a young puppy, you know, that they behave and they smell a certain way and they act in a certain way. Once they get a bit older, it's quite often, you know, a boisterous teenage dog, you know, playing a bit roughly with another dog, they might experience a few knockbacks. And those can have a good effect on them, and those can have a not so good effect on them, depending on how they perceive it and what the adult dog does. So what might look like a big skirmish actually might just be that your boisterous teenager has pushed his luck a little bit, and actually the adult dog's saying, that's enough. I don't like that. And as long as the dogs retreat, as long as they calm down and then they can get on and rub shoulders again, then there's a lesson learned there. It's not a fight, it's a lesson learned. But it takes a bit of confidence to let that kind of thing happen. And if it happens on a regular basis, then no, it's not good. So it's really hard, I know, to sort of know what to do, what to leave and what to let them get on with. I certainly never say, let them sort it out themselves. In the long term, I would never advise that. If dogs are fighting, don't do that.
We've touched on the whole sort of issue of socialization about, talking about what I do with, training pups from the stage that they're in the I'm trying to say Valplaude, in the the puppy pen when they're small. But we got a question here from Anne Greensmith, and she's asking, what's the best way to introduce a new puppy to other dogs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question, because you need to let your puppy mix. You need to socialize them, and as long as I would look at the kind of other dogs you're introducing them to in your, if it's your other dogs in the house, are they, at all territorial about their home? In which case you don't want poor old puppy to mosey in and be sort of defended, So sometimes just taking them away from the house or into the garden or somewhere where it's not, well, depends on your garden, but somewhere where it's not such a big thing. And I always like to keep the dogs sort of not pointing straight at each other, and I don't tend to allow them to rush straight in. You can do this very gently, and you can take a whole day about it if you like. Little bit of exposure, just sort of let them see each other and then, put them away again, and then let them see each other again and put them away again. Or maybe take them for a walk together. Depends how old your puppy is. It depends on the personality of your other dogs. A lot of the time, because it's a young puppy, a good, well-socialized adult dog would not grab it and beat it up. A young puppy, say you're talking about 8 weeks, 7 weeks old or something like that, they may not be pushy, and they may, hopefully they'll just kind of be a bit wary. But I would say the biggest clue and the biggest positive you can do here is take your time. Take your time. Don't think, right, the puppy's home, we'll give them half an hour and let them get on with it. It might take you a couple of days for them to get used to each other. It might take longer, but try and avoid the confrontational behaviours that you would not like your dog to have to face anywhere, which is things like sudden close contact, face-to-face contact, having their toys or their bed taken over, those kinds of things that you think, well, actually, I don't think my dog would like that. What would be good is, okay, parallel walk, if you can do something like that, or, let them investigate the puppy while you still hold the puppy, but reward the older dog, make sure the older dog is the one getting all the treats and all the fuss and everything, so that they start thinking, do you know what? Every time this puppy's around, you, owner, get really nice and friendly. I really like that. So they start to build a whole positive feeling about it.
That's such a great tip. I mean, because one of the things that I'm faced with, having 3 older dogs and 3 puppies in the house, because all the pups are still here, is that, I have a company to run, a house to run, dogs to take care of, and getting 3 pups socialized with big dogs is a really big job. And of course, if I let all 3 pups out with one dog, the pups rush the big dog. So, I mean, and we're talking chaos here. And actually, I mean, Bassets are incredibly, in my experience, they are incredibly laid back. And the big dogs have always been around the pups. So they don't really, they don't react at all. In fact, they ignore them. But one of the ways that I find actually the best way to sort of introduce them is, or to get them used to spending time together, is that walk, a short walk. Put one of the big dogs on the lead. And I know if any Basset breeders are listening, we always say you shouldn't really walk a Basset hound until they're 8 to 10 months, because they're, yes, Karen, your eyes are going, well, you let them play in the garden, because they're a dwarf dog and they have a very, they're complex elbows and leg system. So a lot of Basset breeders will say, please do not walk, as in road train your dog as a young dog. But I mean, I start early. I put them lead training. We're lead training now. What am I doing? 15-minute walk, I suppose. 15-minute walk, and I take one of the big ones.
Yeah, I think that's something that's raised another issue, which is, if you're introducing a new puppy and you don't want, again, we're talking about dog-dog interaction here on this podcast. So, don't let a younger dog constantly pester an older dog. It's not fair. Your older dog doesn't want that all the time. So give the puppy time to rest. It's very important. Don't over frazzle the puppy because they get worse and worse and worse and they mouth really hard and they just get overtired. Give them a chance to rest. Give your older dog a bit of a time to rest. So if you're taking them out, it's the same for playing. Let them play, let them have a nice time, let them play with their friend dogs when they're out on walks, great. But always know when it's time to intervene. If you let it go on too long, sometimes rough games can escalate and the dogs get a bit fed up with each other, and that's when you end up having scraps. So just be careful. Don't get nervous about it, but just think, I think they've had enough now. Yeah, so do I. Okay, let's just, let's separate them.
Well, Karen, I think we're up to 35 minutes, so we better round up the show for this week.
Oh, yes, I've had a great letter, another letter. I think we've heard from him before. He is a terrier. He gets his owner to write for him.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I can't do the accent, but do you remember on the last podcast we talked about Johnny Depp, the film star, who had babysat for Brad and Angelina's dog, and had kind of got sort of leaped on by it and ended up having to be rescued. Well, Marley decided to write to us, to give Johnny Depp a few tips, and he actually says he's invited him to come over and babysit for him, Marley, and here are the instructions that he's leaving for him. So I'm going to read this in human speak. But I will post it in Marley speak on the show notes so that you can read it, because he does have a very particular way of talking, and obviously with dogs talking they can't talk like we do. So the first thing is, don't you worry if the dog is upside down in his beanbag and immobile for up to 18 hours. He is not dead, he is planning. Okay, number 2, you will know when he is hungry because his eyes will be open. As in the dog being open. Please keep the fire going. The dog is not inflammable. And also, remember to ask the humans for the combination number to the fridge lock and write it down for the dog. Love, Marley. So, Johnny Depp, if you're listening, when you're looking after Marley, that's what you need to remember.
Oh, I think my woofs would definitely appreciate that kind of approach. Thank you very much, Marley, for getting in touch. And remember that if anyone else out there wants to share their experience with dogs, comment on the show, ask Karen some questions, why don't you send us a tweet on twitter.com/wildpaw, or you can send an email to podcast@karenwild.co.uk. And, well, Karen, I think that's just about it for this week, isn't it?
Yeah, that went quite quickly. I hope it's been enjoyable, and comments always really welcome. Next week, I thought we'd talk about handling, what makes a good handler. So we've talked about dog aggression, and we've said a few things that you could do. I'd really like to explore as an owner, what can you do about a few things that you might be doing on a daily basis that will actually that you could change, that will change your whole approach to your dog and how your dog is reacting. So we're going to do that next time.
All right, and before we go, I'd just like to remind you that if you'd like to build your own personal training manual, go along to Karen's website, which is www.intellidogs.co.uk, and you can put together your own training package with some very, very clearly outlined instructions from Karen. So, until next time, Karen, good luck walking your dogs.
Yes, good luck, everyone. And don't forget, the email address is podcast@karenwild.co.uk or Wildpaw on Twitter. And I can't wait to hear from you. Thanks again. Bye.
The Wildpaw Podcast, sponsored by 2 Pure Pet Fresh, recommended by pet behaviour specialists to get rid of odours and bacteria caused by spraying, marking or house training accidents.